Hey everybody, it's Professor Reese back at you. We have covered so much ground. Where we left off, I believe, was the Reconstruction era and Jim Crow, where the North beat up on the South was defeated, and so forth. And so it supposedly meant the end to all slavery. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Civil Rights Movement. It was a movement that was organized by Black Americans to end racial discrimination. We wanted to have equal rights under the law, It began in the late 1940s and ended in the late 1960s. Under these laws, once these laws were erected, they were supposed to protect every American's constitutional rights, regardless of race, color, creed, or national origin. Oh, we left out sex or national origin. So let me give you a little bit of a timeline as to the Civil Rights Movement. We'll start July 26, 1948. President Harry Truman issues an executive order to end segregation in the armed services. Now listen, I want you guys to listen to these different events that are in the timeline because you are going to be choosing one of those events to put in your book that you're going to create through Book Creator. Okay, and then we have May 17th, 1954, Brown versus Brown and the Board of Education, or Brown versus the Board of Education. It was 5 cases. It was decided by the Supreme Court. It was supposed to end racial segregation in public schools. However, many schools remained segregated. Remember when we talked a little bit about Jim Crow, how with Jim Crow, there were people in the South that said, I don't care what's been passed. I want to control peoples that are different from me. Moving right along, we had the case in 1955 of Emmett Till, and this is a case that is especially warm to my heart in looking at the pictures that evolved from his death. Emmett was a 14-year-old boy out of Chicago who supposedly made the mistake of flirting with a white woman. He did a whistle. We call him a catcall. His murderers, they're acquitted. The case brings national attention. Emmett was killed by the husband of the wife who was supposedly flirted with, as well as some other friends. And what they did is they shot Emmett, and then they took weights and weighed him down with the weights in a river. So what happens when you're in a river for a long period of time, you got fish and everything else that's going to be eating off something that they consider to be fish food. So what was big about this is that the Jet magazine, I know you guys don't know what that is, small publication, Black-owned magazine, they published the picture of Emmett Till's beaten body and his mother saying that she wanted America to learn from this, gave him an open casket funeral. We move right along to 1956, where Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat to a white man in Montgomery, Alabama. I'm going to back this up a little bit with Rosa Parks. We all know the story, how she refused because she was tired and felt like she was deserving of a seat just like her white counterparts. But before Rosa, there was a lady by the name of Claudia Colvin, and she was actually the first individual that refused to give up her seat to a white man. So remember those two names, because once again, we're going to be taking each one of these subject matters on the timeline in civil rights, and you're going to choose one of those to write about. January 10th, 1957, 60 Black pastors and civil rights leaders from several southern states, including Martin Luther King, meet in Atlanta, Georgia. What Dr. King, his whole goal was to start putting together nonviolent protests against racial discrimination. September 4th, 1957, 9 Black students known as the Little Rock Nine are blocked from integrating of the Little Rock High School, Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, believe it or not, my cousin was a part of that whole period. She was one of the Little Rock Nine. So it's funny how we can sometimes, history can go full circle. Okay, and then in September 9th, 1957, we see how a lot of things happened around the 50s era. Eisenhower, Dwight E. Eisenhower, signs the Civil Rights Act of 1957, and he puts into the law to protect voter rights. So in other words, Black people can now vote. You cannot suppress another human being's right to vote. And this has been part of the issue for a while here. Back in, we just take it back to the slavery days, and then we move forward to Puritan days. If we move forward to, there we go, construction days, pre-construction, and then post-reconstruction, we'll see that that is why the power was held with different peoples, because they had rights to vote through laws called Black codes or slave codes. We weren't allowed to vote. We weren't allowed to marry. We weren't allowed to own property. We were treated as chattel, and we kind of talked about that before. So fast forwarding, Civil Rights Act of 1957 says that it's now illegal to suppress another human being's right to vote. Then we go fast forward to 1960. Excuse me. 4 African-American college students in Greensboro refused to leave a Woolworths whites-only lunch counter without being served. That counter is still there today, and it's actually a museum in North Carolina where you can walk through, sit at the original booths. They have the original menus, all of that. So if you're ever in North Carolina, check out that museum. It is fantastic. Okay, so then we move on. We've had the lunch counter, the Woolworth incident. Then we have the Greensboro sit-in, and it sparked a whole lot of activity in the South where Blacks had just decided to come together and to protest, but it was all done under the guise of being nonviolent protest. We fast forward to 1960, or another month in 1960. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges is escorted by four armed federal marshals. She became the first Black student to integrate a school in New Orleans. 1961. We had Black and white activists that were known as Freedom Riders. They took buses through the South to protest against segregation. They wanted things to be integrated. And so what happened to these poor riders? They were killed by the Ku Klux Klan, who had begun to become famous in this era as well, out of the state of Tennessee, the KKK. So whites and Black Freedom Riders were killed during this initiative. 1963, I'm not going to say whose year that is, Governor George Wallace stands in the doorway at the University of Alabama to block Black students from registering in school until President John F. Kennedy sends the National Guard to the campus so that the students are allowed into the school. Okay, so we have lots more events that went on in 1963. We had the church bombing in Birmingham. In July of 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that prohibits discrimination due to race, color, and sex in terms of employment. February 1965, Malcolm X is assassinated. 1965, we had Black Sunday. We move on to President Johnson signing the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, I don't know if you realize that there's like an occurring theme here. The law was sent into legislation to become a law to prohibit all of these acts against Black people or discrimination against a race of people. But we go back and forth with it because they were put into law, but you always had somebody that fought against it. So the law really never took effect. Big event in our lives. April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated by James Earl Ray. So that's kind of our timeline on civil rights. Anyway, it's been fun. I got to run. We will not close with the African proverb this time. I'll just say thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day.